Hello again, it's me Chaz, back with another video, and this is the first video I've ever made which is strictly based on the CONCACAF. The CONCACAF is one of the 6 continental government bodies for FIFA. In the other videos I've made, I've discussed those other regions or other confederations, such as UEFA, which covers Europe, and the AFC, which covers Asia, as well as the CONMEBOL, which covers South America, the OFC, which covers the Oceania, and finally the CAF, the CAF, which covers Africa. The CONCACAF is made up of nations from North and Central America, as well as the Caribbean. The 2026 World Cup will be the 4th time that the World Cup would be held in this region. It's also the first ever World Cup to have a total of 3 different nations. That's the United States of America, Canada, and Mexico will all be co-hosting the 2026 World Cup. This is the 3rd time Mexico has hosted the World Cup, the first time being in 1970. They are the first nation from the CONCACAF to ever host the World Cup, and the first nation to host the World Cup 2 times in 1986, and now they will be the first to ever host it 3 times in 2026. The USA hosted the World Cup in 1994. This is now the 2nd time they will host the World Cup. And Canada, this is the 1st time they will ever host the World Cup. Should also mention that the USA and Mexico are the first 2 nations from the CONCACAF to ever compete at the World Cup. They competed in the very first World Cup in Uruguay in 1930. Also, no nation from the CONCACAF has ever reached the final of the World Cup. The nation that came the closest was the USA in 1930, the first World Cup, when they reached the semi-final. They were beaten by Argentina 6-1. But since then, no other nation from the CONCACAF reached the semi-finals. Alright, that's a couple of facts about the CONCACAF. We're going to move on to the CONCACAF World Cup qualifying process. The 2026 World Cup will have the most nations ever to compete at the World Cup. A total of 48 nations will compete at this World Cup. 6 of them are guaranteed to come from the CONCACAF, including the 3 hosts that I already mentioned, and a possible 2 more can qualify through the playoff process. This World Cup will be the World Cup to have the most nations, the CONCACAF, to compete in. There are a total of 3 different rounds in the World Cup qualifying campaign in the CONCACAF. The first round only had 4 nations in. These were the 4 lowest ranked nations in the CONCACAF: Anguilla, Turks and Caicos Islands, the US Virgin Islands, and the British Virgin Islands were all the lowest ranked nations in the CONCACAF. The 4 nations were divided in 2 matchups. Angola played the Turks and Caicos Islands, while the US Virgin Islands played the British Virgin Islands. The matches took place over 2 legs, and the winner of these matches will then enter the 2nd round with the rest of the nations in the CONCACAF. Both of these matches ended up on penalties. Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands both were winners, and they were put amongst the nations in the 2nd round of the CONCACAF. In the 2nd round, the 30 nations were split up into 6 groups of 5. The top 2 nations in each group would move on to the 3rd round, while all the other nations below them will be knocked out of this World Cup qualifying campaign. As filming this video, recording it, we are currently in the 2nd round. Almost forgot to mention, All nations will play each other one time in the second round in their groups, 2 home games and 2 away games. Again, if they finish first or second, they will move on to the third and final round. The third round is the round where nations will start qualifying for the World Cup. The 12 nations that went through to this round will be split up into 3 groups of 4. The nation that finishes top of those groups will then qualify for the 2026 World Cup. The 2 best runners-up in those 3 groups will then have another opportunity to qualify for the World Cup in the playoffs. That's the Interconfederation playoffs. Also, unlike the second round, in this round, all nations will play 2 times, typically home and away, in their groups. So there's a big possibility that 8 teams would qualify from the CONCACAF. Since we're in the second round, let's have a look on the second round. Groups, starting off with Group A, we have Honduras, Cuba, Cayman Islands, Antigua and Bermuda, The current top 2 nations in this group, Honduras and Cuba, are the only nations in this group that have qualified for the World Cup. Cuba actually being the very first nation from the Caribbean to ever qualify for a World Cup. They qualified back in 1938 in France. Cuba actually reached the quarterfinals. In that tournament, there was only knockout phase, so they did beat Romania to then reach the quarterfinals, but they were beaten severely bad by Sweden 8-0. But with that said, they are still the closest team in the Caribbean to ever come close to winning the World Cup. They haven't qualified since then though. Honduras qualified for back-to-back World Cups in the 2010s, but haven't qualified since then themselves. But as the table looks, them 2 are the most likely ones that will qualify from this group. Alright, move on to Group B. Group B has Costa Rica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and Nevis, Grenada and Bahamas. The top 2 teams in this group, just like in Group A, are the only ones to have qualified for the World Cup in the past. That's Costa Rica and Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago qualified for the World Cup for the first time in 2006, but haven't been to the World Cup since then. Costa Rica, on the other hand, have qualified for the last 3 World Cups, and in 2014 they had a fantastic run, reaching the quarterfinals. They got knocked out by Netherlands on penalties. Again, those 2 teams are most likely to qualify from this group. Move on to Group C now. We have Curacao, that's the top of this table. Haiti is in this group, as well as St. Lucia, Aruba and Barbados. There is only one nation in this group that has ever qualified for the World Cup, and that is Haiti. That was back in 1974 in Germany, but they haven't qualified for the World Cup since then. Again, part of the top 2 teams there, they do look like they are going to reach the third round. Group D, you have Nicaragua, Panama, Guyana, Montserrat and Belize. In this group, in the top 2 teams, Nicaragua and Panama. Panama are the only nation in this group to ever have qualified for the World Cup. They qualified back in 2018. That's the last time they qualified. Missed out on the last World Cup. But again, looks like they are going to get to the third round. Group E, you have Guatemala, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Dominica, and the British Virgin Islands. As I mentioned, the British Virgin Islands was in the first round. They managed to reach the second round, but currently, as you can see, they are bottom of this group. Jamaica, currently second in this group, are the only nation in this group to ever qualify for the World Cup. They qualified back in 1998 in France, but haven't qualified for a World Cup since. They are in a good position to reach the third round, just like Guatemala. And in the final group, in Group F, Suriname, Puerto Rico, El Salvador, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Anguilla, who I mentioned earlier, were in the first round and managed to reach the second round, are in this group. El Salvador is the only nation in this group to have ever qualified for the World Cup. They qualified twice, first time in Mexico in 1970 and again in 1982, but haven't qualified themselves since then. And unlike the other nations that I mentioned that have qualified for the World Cup before, they are actually out of the third round spot, but only by goal difference. Alright, that's my first ever CONCACAF video. Thanks for watching, I appreciate it. Small opinion on the CONCACAF. I do hope that at least two of those nations can reach the quarterfinals, because again, it's a good image if not necessarily a host nation from the region, but a nation from that region could at least reach a quarterfinal. The possibility for a team to win it, probably not, but from the CONCACAF anyway to win it. But hey, even if they could reach the semi-final, that would look good as well for the region. It shows some improvement, because I genuinely believe over the years they clearly have been surpassed by the AFC and the CAF. So since it's in their region this time, they need to have a really good showing. Anyway, as recording this video, the CONCACAF is starting up today on the 4th of June. Some matches going to be played today. So I'm hoping to drop this video before those matches happen today. Got a match that starts at 8 o'clock GMT time. That's Dominica against British Virgin Islands. That's in Group E. Also got Montserrat against Belize, happening at 10 in Group D. And Barbados will take on Aruba in Group C, same time, 10. Anyway, thanks for watching, listening, appreciate it as always. Please like, comment and subscribe. Thanks again, and bye.